All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in our series titled The Power of Policies and Procedures. Today's webinar is Why Do Policies and Procedures Matter? So my name is Daniela Labate-Cavelli, and I'm from NYAPRS, and NYAPRS is a MCTAC partner. I'm joined today by my colleague, also representing NYAPRS, Eve Addis. You want to give a wave, Eve? And then Marlo Passion, who is from the Coalition for Behavioral Health. There she is. Today's webinar is being recorded. Actually, Tara, if you could advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording, along with the slide deck, will be made available on the MCTAC website. And we want to encourage folks to use the chat box and make this as interactive as possible. So we have a few poll questions, we have a chat box question, we've got a cool word cloud thing that we're going to try to do, and we really just sort of want to hear from you in any way that we possibly can. So we've also set aside some time at the end for questions, so feel free to chat in your questions to all panelists so that we can keep track throughout and then answer your questions at the end. Next slide, please. And this is just our partner slide. Next slide. And this is just a reminder that this is one of 4 in the series. So March 10th, March 25th. No, that's a typo. Yes, that's correct. March 10th, March 25th, and April 8th. We've got 3 more webinars in the series, and we hope that you'll join us for those as well. And you can do that by registering at ctacny.org. And we have a poll for you. So this poll is anonymous. What or how often do you look at your organization's policies and procedures? Do you look at them annually, more than once a year, never? And if it's never, it's okay. We won't tell anyone, or whenever necessary. So Tara's going to pull up the poll and give everybody a minute to fill that in so we can sort of gauge where our audience is with regard to how often we look at our policies and procedures. All right, so let's see. Most people, when necessary. Most people chose when necessary, followed by more than once a year, and then annually or never. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so I think that gives us a good idea of sort of where people are at. I'm going to actually turn it over to Eve. Tara, if you could take us to the next slide. Eve's going to get into a little bit about the difference between policy and procedure and talk to us a little bit about that.
It really ranged from.
Oh, there you go.
I said I was very taken by the answers to the word cloud because they ranged from tedious to accountability, which I found to be sort of this broad range of how people view. So this is really to just distinguish between what a policy is and what a procedure is. So, the policy is the rationale, basically. It states the why. Why do we have this? What's the point? What's the purpose? And so it gives us sort of the broad sort of framework for a policy. And the procedure is what you need to do. So the procedure is the how. How do we do this? What are the steps to fulfill the why? Next slide. So, policies and procedures are very linked to how people in an organization behave. And it really is important with regard to the health of an organization, because if everyone in the organization knows what their role is, knows what they have to do, the organization is going to operate a lot more smoothly. And for the individuals, it empowers them in that they know what to do. They know in a situation, they know their role, and then they don't have to worry about or become anxious about, okay, so what do I do now? I understand my role. I understand my job. I know what I have to do, and I'm fulfilling what the organization expects of me. So it's very empowering to follow a policy and to know your role in the steps of the procedures associated with that policy. Next slide. So taking that to another level, when you know what you need to do and you feel confident about your role, you're going to be much more satisfied about your place in the organization. Your anxiety will be reduced because there'll be less ambiguity about what you're supposed to do. You're much less likely to make an error because you are following and know what the steps are that you are to follow. There's really an advantage in that you can act quickly in a given situation. Your productivity is enhanced. You're not caught up in any conflict about, should I do this, should I do that, or who's doing what. The role clarity also preserves the relationships you have with people, because if everybody else knows what to do, you're not going to bump into one another. If everybody does, then that sort of speaks to the accountability piece. Everybody's accountable for a particular thing. And if everybody knows what that is, that makes everybody's life much more predictable. And in terms of predictability, it gives us safety. In that if we're confident about what we have to do, we know what the steps are, we know what everybody's roles are, we can feel safe. And this really boils down to trust, in that managers and supervisors won't need to micromanage unnecessarily. Because if they are confident that policies and procedures are being followed and that everybody knows what those are, then they can sort of sit back and give, by empowering their staff to follow those steps and know that they will be followed in a timely and accurate way. Next slide. So policies and procedures then, following from what I've just said, have a direct impact on organizational health. They support the organization's goals and objectives. Standards of service delivery are preserved. The organization's desired outcomes are much more likely to be realized. And in so doing, so will the organization's expectations around revenue. And the reputation of the organization, of course, will be heightened, because people will sort of be able to rely on the consistency of this organization in terms of how they operate and how they do what they do. And then, last but not least, following policies and procedures, being familiar with them and knowing what your roles are, guarantees alignment with the organization's mission and values. And then if you have all of those things in place, and your job satisfaction is improved, then it reduces workforce turnover. And that is a cost saving. So you can count on that monetarily, in that, workforce recruitment and hiring is an expensive proposition. There's a loss of productivity when you have a very high turnover. So policies and procedures also become a kind of a bulwark against unnecessary spending, in that you have a satisfied and productive and aligned workforce. Next slide. And that I think is that still me?
I think I can provide an example, Eve. So one example in which record keeping is an example in which providing or developing a structure can aid in producing consistency and increasing productivity. So for all of you joining us, think about your record keeping policies and procedures and how that enhances your organizational sustainability, your organizational culture and health. We could think of record keeping in the sense of what it might be. One area that we could think of is record keeping, fulfilling regulatory requirements and keeping the team organized. That might be one rationale. And one policy might be everyone being on the same page around where to keep the records, when to be maintaining the records, and who will be maintaining the records. And that feeds into the procedures on how to go about doing it. Are we saving things electronically? Are we saving things in a physical space? If there are more than if there is more than one program sharing a space or sharing a platform, how would we go about sharing that space? So it can get very intricate, and we can go down a rabbit hole in this example, but that's just the taste of how policies and procedures can keep your whole organization organized just by thinking about this. So in the next slide, I'll hand it over to Daniela, who's going to be talking about types of policies.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, we're going to go through a bunch of different kinds of policies, and these are basically various types of policies that all nonprofits should have. So we're going to go ahead to the next slide and start with governance policies. And the first thing I'm actually going to say is that all of your policies and procedures should be approved by your board of directors. So not all of these governance policies are required by the IRS, but they are in fact good practice, and you should, we're going to encourage you all to consider adopting these if you have not already. So basically things like whistleblower policies, policies that ensure that there are no repercussions to folks who report any abuse or fraud, conflict of interest policies that speaks mostly directly to the board of directors. Oftentimes we have a board who has a connection with, a banker or an insurance broker or someone like that. And when we affiliate with those folks and we vote on, who our vendors will be, we ask that the board member that has a conflict not vote, right? So that conflict of interest policy keeps things sort of clean in that respect. Document destruction, I'm not going to go through all of these, but document destruction, it's really unnecessary to keep documents for longer than we need to. So depending on, is it a Medicaid thing? Is it a financial information? Is it, your records? All of those things should have different policies around how long you keep that information. Joint venture and chapter, branch and affiliate both have to do with legal affiliations, and I'm sure most folks don't have those issues, but you should have those policies if you do have chapter branches and affiliates. Next slide, please. So your board of directors policies are the next ones that we're going to go through, and this should really have its own sort of manual. Your board of directors should have their own manual, and this is encompassing everything that that you need to do to keep your board functioning. And it includes everything from your mission statement to how you recruit your board members, how you bring them on board and orient them, and how you evaluate the board, how the board evaluates the CEO or the executive director, your organizational chart. What does the organization look like on paper from the top down? Who supervises who? Do you have committees? Do you have board committees? Do you have a finance committee? Do you have an HR committee? How often do those committees meet? How do they communicate with the larger board? How do they communicate with each other? And how do they communicate with the staff and service recipients? All of those things are things you need to think about when you're developing your board of directors policies. Also things like term limits, how long will people be on your board, and how will they be recruited and voted in? Next slide, please. Corporate compliance is the next section we want to talk about. This is also part of your governance policies. And basically this is, the list of things that we need to put in place to make sure that there's really no fraud or abuse happening, right? These policies exist to ensure the safety of your staff and the service participants. They look at the quality of the services, the staff who provides the services, the credentialing, and there's, all sorts of things around codes of conduct, confidentiality, how you document, how you report, how you track information, who keeps track of that, where you keep track of that information. And in most organizations, there's a, compliance department, and in some organizations, that department is one person, and that person has maybe another task, also at the organization. In larger organizations, we see corporate compliance departments that have many staff and layers of staff. So it really depends on, the size of your organization. Next slide. Our next group is around Hipaa, and hopefully everybody knows what Hipaa is. It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And this is all about providing data and security provisions and keeping protected health information safe. All of these rules or policies and guidelines are around safety, security, and privacy, right? So, and sharing information only with consent. So business associate agreements, I think, are an important policy to keep in mind. Who are your vendors, right? And what access do they have to folks' protected health information? Do you have business associate agreements to sort of safeguard around that? What are your policies around consents and data sharing? What are your policies around storage and encryption, especially now with so many folks working remotely? And we have so many services being provided in the community. I think storage and encryption is really important. And all of the staff should have a very good working knowledge and understanding of how to keep information safe while they're providing services either remotely or in the community. And all of that, training around how to keep that stuff in check, I think, is really important. Eve, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other thing here, and that is a policy and procedure around if there's a breach of PHI. It has happened now. A number of organizations now have actually been hacked, and there's all sorts of ransomware out there. So there needs to be a very clear policy about what happens, who's notified if there is a breach of PHI at any point. And it's something that's very serious now because it's happening more and more.
Yes, and that was actually not on the slide, but I was going to bring it up. And I actually have a story about that. I was doing TA with a provider out in Oregon, and I remember our first session, virtual session, he actually called me up and he said, I can't meet, we just had a data breach. And they were holding all of their software hostage, basically. So it was a really big deal. And they actually did not have a policy in place around that, but they do now. Needless to say, they do now. So it's super important. Next slide, please. All right, so HR and employee manuals. So this is another sort of manual, just like the board manual that we talked about. This should have a sort of a separate manual. And whether you do that, by an actual binder manual or you keep it on an intranet, we'll get into that kind of stuff a little bit later too. But all of these policies really speak to the culture and the rules of your organization, and they really set clear expectations for all of the employees, right? Things like, what is expected of you in your job? How often will we be evaluating your performance? What will that look like? Do you have goals for the year? Things that we're going to work on together. What does your internet usage and your social media look like, especially nowadays where folks are maybe sometimes encouraged to use social media and promote what's going on in the organization? I think it's really important to have some policies around limitations around usage. How often are we using our computers or our work devices for this kind of thing, and what are we doing when we do use them? Some of these policies may be required based on your licensing. There may be legal and moral issues related to and hiring policies related to this HR policy manual. Drug and alcohol policy, for example, sexual harassment policy is one that is required. Another one might be violence in the workplace. So basically, this whole section or this whole employee manual really sets expectations for the employees and really sets the tone so that they understand, what the policies and procedures are and how they align with the organization's mission, vision, and values, and so that everyone sort of has a really good understanding of what's expected of them.
Yeah, if I may also add something here, this is very important because it relates very strongly to safety in terms of the employees' safety, feelings of safety in the organization, in that in having this set of policy and procedures, it enhances the employee's sense of predictability I know what's expected of me. I know what will happen in the event of X, Y, and Z. And so I don't have to walk around, wondering when the shoe's going to drop, so to speak. I am in control. It gives me some sense. It empowers me because I know exactly what to expect. And I know if I'm not doing it, then I know that I'm in jeopardy of potentially losing my job. So it gives the person the parameters within which they can operate safely. It's very important to have that predictability as an employee in order to be able to do the job that you are hired to do.
That's right. Yep. Thanks, Steve. Next slide, please. And I'm going to move through these a little bit quicker just because of the interest of time. So accounting and finance, another one that should have its sort of own manual, if you will, just like some of the other ones that we talked about. I encourage folks on the line, if you are not in the accounting department, to share this slide with your accounting or finance department to make sure that you've got all of these. And these are all policies and procedures around tracking how money comes in and leaves, comes in and goes out of the organization, right? Things like your chart of accounts. Each program that you operate should have its own sort of chart of accounts where you can track budgets and what comes in and what goes out. Inventory and property records is another one I just want to highlight real quick, especially nowadays, because like I said earlier in the other slide about folks working remotely, organizations are giving out laptops and iPads and tablets and all kinds of electronic devices, phones, to their employees. And you want to be able to keep track of those things so that you can cost them appropriately to each program that they should be costed out to. Next slide. So the next slide is around safety. And I think this is the last slide in the section. Yeah. So this is, all of these things are policies and procedures to keep staff and service recipients safe, right? Some of these are specific to your organization, like you're not going to have a policy and procedure around home visits and checking in with your supervisor when you're doing a home visit so that you make sure that your staff, gets to where they're supposed to be going and then also, leaves and finishes, and is home safely or wherever their next appointment is safely afterwards. If that does not apply to your organization. If you don't have passive restraint training, if you don't use those techniques at your organization, you may have de-escalation training, and you may have policies and procedure around de-escalation. Food service, universal precautions, all of these things are things around keeping people safe. All right, so I think in the interest of time, we're just going to keep moving, and I'm going to turn it over to Marlo, who is going to talk to us about why all of this matters.
Yeah, given a nice spread of the different types of policies, you may be asking, what did all these things mean? Why do they matter? And we have a little chat question for you all, just to get you thinking about the why of it. So in the chat box, if you're open to sharing, we welcome you and invite you to do so. Would you think of an activity or a requirement in your organization for which there is no policy or procedure at this time, and where you think there might be gaps that could help streamline the activity for your team and your agency? This can account for unexpected occurrences, like with Daniela had shared an example of working with a provider from Oregon who didn't previously have a data breach policy and procedure, but upon experiencing one, they learned their lesson, and they, after that point, created a policy and procedure for data breaches. How about for your agencies and programs? In light of this past year, with the myriad of changes that we've encountered, you might have developed certain policies and procedures pertaining to COVID times. And as far as growth for agency, any change could potentially bring on the possibility of updating and growing policies and procedures to match those changes, to really keep up with that pace of change and growth for your agency. So let's check to see. So So some of you are saying in the chat box, thank you for sharing. I'm thinking of suggesting some changes to help our peers be productive and empowered. Yes, empowerment is a great issue, especially now that we are experiencing a lot of change, social reckoning in light of a lot of the racial tensions that we've been experiencing as a nation and internationally. Some of you are saying no formalized safety training. It's maybe covered, but nothing employees sign or any specific person doing a uniform training. So yeah, I think if there were to be formed some policies and procedures around standardizing procedures for training, that would help everyone feel reassured that everyone is covered. MBO procedures, management by objective framework, yes. With telehealth, we're revamping policy on how to deal with crisis calls, visits, and a lot of staff are remote and not able to be reached quickly. Yes, we've all adapted very much to remote work for those of us who have been faced with it in the past year, and we've probably had to adapt fairly quickly. It's sort of like a boot camp of sorts, and transitioning some of our policies and procedures to match those changes. Zoom meeting etiquette, of course, along with the Zoom experience or the Zoom fatigue comes the Zoom etiquette. Providing care to patients, Narcan training, yes. Now, how do we do that remotely now? And we're not able to really be there in the room with someone when often Narcan trainings are most helpful in person. Including pandemic and emergency disaster planning, yes. So we've had to deal with various disasters in New York, from World Trade Center to Sandy to other things that have happened. Thank goodness most of our agencies are not having to deal with the same kind of disasters that other regions or other states are experiencing, but we do have our own. And thank you so much for all of these thoughts. I think in the interest of time, we'll be moving along, but we really appreciate a lot of thought that you've put into just this reflection. So thank you all.
So before we go ahead, I just noticed somebody in the chat box asked or said that it would be helpful to have some examples of actual policies and procedures. So I wrote this in the chat box, but in case folks are not paying attention to the chat box, we are actually going to be focusing on those specific things in the next 2 webinars. So we're going to talk about how do we actually develop policies and procedures, and then we're going to have examples of policies and procedures written through a recovery lens in the next 2 webinars. So we encourage you to register for those and stay tuned for some of those. And I believe one of our presenters for the 3rd webinar will actually be providing us with a template.
Yeah, we hope that some of these thoughts that are coming to the surface for you will be inspiration for building policies and procedures that we'll be going over in the next webinars in the series. So in the next slide, we wanted to just offer you at least 2 metaphors on how policies and procedures might play out in each of your organizations and programs. So one metaphor that we like to use is a football huddle, and I'm by no means the most well-versed in football, but I imagine when you're in a football huddle, your coach is directing all of you in your team on what the next play may be. Each of you will have a role, and each of you in your roles will, with some guidance and structure, be able to put on your game and win the game for your team. Eve, I think your play, your theater huddle will further exemplify this. So I'll hand it over to you.
Look at what it takes. Look at what it takes to put on a production. You know, you have multiple cast members. You need to have stage directions. The stage directions are basically the procedure. If you didn't have stage directions, the characters would all show up on stage not knowing when. They would probably be bumping into each other without stage directions. Stage right, stage left. It creates an atmosphere of sort of cohesion in that everybody knows when to come in, everybody knows when to step out, everybody knows what to say. And the whole thing from beginning to end is orchestrated. And so, you have to think of a policy and procedure like that it's an orchestration of multiple people on the same stage, each knowing what to do so that the production proceeds seamlessly. And that's the way to think about it when you're trying to give people sort of a rationale for why they should follow policies and procedures. And then the performance of each person can be enhanced because they can really be present in the moment rather than be wondering and distracted by and worried about what it is they have to do. If you know what to do, then you can work most effectively and give the best performance that you can. Next slide. And this basically says what I just said. So again here, the procedures allow for coordination. And the last thing is that when you put on a performance, one of the things you do beforehand is rehearse. So that when it's time to actually be on stage, in other words, when the situation requires that a procedure and a policy be followed, that everybody knows what to do. And that is where training and practice comes in. So it's very important where you have policies and procedures, particularly around safety, like fire drill, evacuation drills. These are all ways to kind of make us, give us muscle memory, if you will, in that when the time comes and time is of the essence and people's lives are in the sort of on the line, you then know exactly what it is. You don't have to think. And that's the issue there, is that sometimes there's no time to think. So the better you are at following a policy and procedure because you've rehearsed it through drills, the more effective you'll be in that moment. And so when people complain about, oh God, it's another fire drill, and I've been through this, it's very important, and there's no way that you can emphasize that more to staff, because in the moment, if people don't know what to do, when lives are at stake, it really becomes a really big problem. So drills, training, practice are very important, especially when you don't have time to go and kind of look at the policy and procedure manual. Next. So I want to say that when you're talking about an organization, again, organizational health, the healthy organization is an organization where people know what to do, where they have practiced what to do when it's important, so that in moments where action has to be momentary, that people are able to do what is necessary without wasting time. And I have to say that this issue again of practice and rehearsal, a lot of people complain about it, and a lot of people sort of will say, well, we don't need this, we've done it enough. It's never enough. And I have to say this because there's always new people coming into an organization, and so there's never, I would say, a point where you could say, well, we know it, we can stop practicing it. That's never the case. And it's like, again, going back to the theater example, to the production example, I think people in the theater will let you know that the more they do it, the more they practice it, the better they become at performing at their peak. Next slide. So I'm taking this one, I guess. So a healthy organization is one where everyone knows what to do. Everyone knows what everyone else's role is in any given situation. So you're not bumping into each other, or you're not doing things that are unnecessary because it's somebody else's job to do. And it's also that you can support one another if you know what everybody's role is, so that if someone leaves something out, you're there to sort of be as a backup. And that's just good kind of teamwork, right? Everybody knows not only their role, but everybody else's role, and then the team works in a way to support one another. And this is especially true in an emergency when there's no time to argue or to go and look at the policy and procedure manual. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Eve. We're actually going to go into another poll right now. So Tara, if you could pull the poll up for us, that'd be great. The question is, which policy and procedure is most important in your opinion for your organization right now? And if you don't see one that is important to you on the screen, please use the chat box to type it in. So we've got governance, board of directors, human resources, finance, safety, Hipaa, corporate compliance, or you can use the chat box to fill your own in. So we'll give you about a minute to take care of this one. I'm actually trying to see if there was anything in the chat box. Quality assurance came up in the chat box. And that would fall under corporate compliance. Okay. We actually have quite a spread here, huh? I guess there's HR and corporate compliance were probably the top answers, and then we have
safety is there too. Safety seems to be one that.
Yes, that's true.
Yep.
Yep, you're right. I missed that one. Good catch. Yep. Good catch. All right, great. Thank you, Tara, for sharing that. Could you take us to the next slide, please? Actually, I think Eve, you're going to do this one.
Yeah. So that's getting back to our title, right? The power of policy and procedure. So I think we should have conveyed at this point how it empowers the workforce by making their roles more predictable and by giving them what they need to do, the information they need to do their jobs. Because of that, it supports organizational sustainability in that a workforce that's equipped, that has the information it needs to do the job of the organization, strengthens the organization and supports its sustainability. It maintains mission integrity, and every organization has a mission, and if everybody follows policies and procedures, there's likely to be less drift in people's actions with regard to the mission of the organization. It keeps the integrity of the mission pure. It protects the organizational reputation in that outsiders, other stakeholders can depend on an organization that is consistent. What policies and procedures do is they keep the organization's activities consistent. And it's important for stakeholders, for people who are going to buy services from the organization, that they know that, if I'm a referring agent, that I know if I refer someone to your organization, I know that there's going to be consistency in how that person is going to receive services, how that person's going to be treated, and also perhaps what the likely outcomes are going to be. So it's important for that sake that the reputation, that we think about policies and procedures as functioning to uphold an organization's reputation. And again, with consistency, everyone, all the stakeholders can kind of rely on this organization, on your organization, because it operates seamlessly, it operates consistently. And of course, with regards to the organizational culture, which we're going to get to in our future presentations, that it maintains the culture of the organization. And that's very important because an organizational culture is, in fact, its calling card. It's, in fact, how it presents itself to the public, to its stakeholders. So policies and procedures are very deeply involved with almost every aspect of an organization's existence.
Tara, if you could take us to the next slide. Awesome, thank you. So just some key points that we felt we wanted to stress, and the takeaways for today's presentation are that, yes, there is a distinction between policy and procedure, right? So the policy is really the framework or the guideline, and the procedure is the how. We want you to think of that theater or that huddle metaphor, where you can sort of think about what the actual policy is and then how it's carried out by the example I think that Eve and Marlo told us about. So either the directions for, football players when they huddle, and then that's how they go ahead and sort of execute on the field, versus, putting a play on and actors sort of knowing their role and where they need to be on set. Policies and procedures are directly related to workforce satisfaction and organizational health, and I think Eve just did a really nice job of sort of explaining all of that for us. And they also foster trust across the organizational hierarchy. Policies and procedures help with consistency across how programs are run. They're directly related to program evaluation, and we're going to get into that a little bit more in some of the next offerings that we have for you in this series. We also think it's really important, that last bullet point, just to really make sure that you consult your own regulatory body for a comprehensive list of all of the policies and procedures that are required of your licensing or regulatory body. We have various groups on the line today, children's providers, adult providers, OAFAS licensed programs, OMH licensed programs. So we just want to make sure that you all have that understanding, and that you can, you should rather just consult with your licensing body to make sure that you've got all of it in place. Okay, so Marlo's going to take us through a little bit about what we're going to talk about in the next series, or the next parts of our series, and then we're going to head into some questions.
Yeah, we have quite a bit in store for all of you, and we wanted to send you off with various invitations to our upcoming offerings. The next offering is the Art of Policy Development, which will be in March 10th. The next one is after that would be Policy Development Through a Recovery Lens. That is very exciting. Please, you don't want to miss that. That's in March 25th. And the last offering in our series would be Keeping Policies and Procedures Relevant and Responsive, and that would be April 8th. And so we know that this session has really generated a lot of juicy thoughts and questions. And so we'll be in the next slide just covering some questions that people might have. And one question that we received during the training is, Daniela, would you be open to revisiting your example around the whistleblower policy?
I don't know if we had an example, but we could certainly talk about the whistleblower policy. So that policy is basically around ensuring that there is no repercussion for folks that are reporting any sort of abuse or neglect or wrongdoings, right? And that's why the whistleblower policy exists. And so that usually that means that there is someone at your agency or someone outside of your agency in a lot of cases that is identified in the policy manual that the person can report these wrongdoings to without feeling like, they'll be in trouble or someone, may be fired for it or whatever the case may be. So I hope that helps. And just to go back to the previous slide that Marlo was talking about, all of those trainings are going to take place from 1 to 2 o'clock. And the next one is around policy development. So we're actually going to walk you through how to write policies and procedures, and then we're going to bring in organizations for the third webinar who have really done a good job, we think, of writing policies and procedures with a recovery lens. And then the last one is about keeping policies and procedures relevant and responsive. So how often do you update? How do you train? How do you keep people up to date on changes, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I'm assuming that we would be covering various ways of specifying concerns around services for specific policies. because I think someone in the chat had said that perhaps they needed more help with specific policies concerning their services. And I wonder if we would be covering a discussion around protocols, I guess.
I am fairly certain that will come up, and I know that our guest presenters for the third webinar will likely be answering some questions related to that as well.
Great.
Yeah, I'd like to answer the questions in the chat box. Somebody wrote, what can we do as individuals when there is an inordinate amount of focus on productivity and income? Although this is important for the agency's viability, how can we accomplish that without losing person-centered and trauma-informed policy and procedures? And I think this is a balancing act, by the way. You know, organizations at different times will be focused on different things. So that there'll be more of an emphasis depending on what's going on. An organization is a living, breathing thing, and that its needs and its hunger, if you will shift from moment to moment. So I think we need to kind of, and I think the person who wrote that in the chat, you seem to be aware that you know, organizations need to kind of handle multiple things at the same time. I think that one of the issues that I read in your question is what happens when an organization loses sight of its culture. Because when you talk about person-centered and trauma-informed, that's cultural. And so when you're saying to me, what happens when there's an imbalance and when all the emphasis is in one area and the culture is ignored, what I will say to you is that that organization is going to be woken up at some point very abruptly, because something's going to happen where its culture deficits will show up and be very obvious. So I would, as I don't know what level in the organization you're at, but I would say try to find through communicating with your supervisors. Try to make the point that without sort of maintaining that balance, and keep in mind that policies and procedures also reflect culture, so that when there is not enough attention on the culture, and when policies and procedures sort of lack, you know, and we're going to talk about recovery being infused into policies and procedures, when it lacks that, what's going to happen is that the organizational sustainability will be threatened. So so try to find ways to communicate that and make people aware that it can't be ignored.
Yeah, and I think we actually will have guest speakers at the policy development through a recovery lens session, and they'll be able to discuss more about how they've been able to make that balance for their agency. So thank you for offering that question.
Are there any other questions?
Any other questions? Oh.
Yeah, I guess while you are all sort of you're all marinating in the information that was presented today, we wanted to just remind everybody that the slides and the recording will be available on the MCTAC website in the next few days.
Yeah, and also, I was just going to say, keep in mind that these four presentations are kind of go hand in hand, in that if you were intrigued by some of the things we raised today, we did a good job. But that means also that a lot of your questions, which are sort of natural and normal given what we've presented, are going to be addressed in the three presentations that follow. So, you know, please tune in for those, and we hope that by the end, everything you wanted to know about policies and procedures will be addressed.
And probably more than you thought you should know. And actually, I'm just going to also add that in our next webinar, we've got some really good resources to offer you as far as templates and other resources around how to get information around policy and procedure development. So Tara, it looks like there's no other questions coming in on your end that we missed. We've got another couple of minutes. If anybody has any questions, please type them in the chat box. And we'll give another minute or so to that. And if not, we will say thank you. And we hope that you will be registering for the rest of our webinars, and we will see you at those.
Yeah, can't wait
Everybody,
to see you all again.
Yeah, everybody be safe out there. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.